Justin Trudeau just tested positive for COVID for the second time in 5 months, 4 doses, double masked, surrounding himself with people who are also double masked and 4-dosed, on airplanes with people who are also at least double dosed and masked. And Trudeau was just very recently in Los Angeles for the Summit of the Americas. That's the trip that he came home with COVID from. I want you to listen. He was audibly sick here.
Your government today lifted the requirement for random testing at airports. I'd just like to ask about the vaccine mandate requirement to board a flight, including domestic flights. Canada appears to be the last country in the world to have that requirement. We saw Transport Minister say there's a trade-off between public health and economic activity. I'd like to ask you, where in that equation do you factor in individual liberty, personal autonomy, the right, the fundamental human right to mobility?
Throughout this pandemic, Canadians were very clear that keeping their neighbors, keeping our frontline workers safe was the top priority. The freedom from sickness and disease, the freedom to be able to get through this pandemic as quickly as possible by leaning on science, which involved vaccine mandates, which incidentally, we had an election that was almost entirely focused on, and Canadians resoundingly voted in favor of parties that said they were going to bring in vaccine mandates to keep Canadians safe. And that's one of the reasons we got to close to 90% vaccination rate in Canada. And the pandemic and the results of the pandemic on a health scale were far less serious in Canada, despite all the tragedies and loss we did face, than in many other countries. And on top of that, our approach of following the best public health advice actually led to better outcomes in terms of reopening, in terms of getting back businesses, in terms of economic recovery. We've recovered 115% of the jobs lost since February 2020, when the United States has only recovered about 95% of those jobs. We put the health and safety of Canadians first. We put economic recovery as a priority as well. And every step of the way we followed science to do that, and that's exactly what we're going to continue to do.
He sounds congested there, right? Like audibly sick. And now Trudeau's positive for COVID and, of course, thanking the vaccines that failed him twice. Actually, I'll have you know that summit was a superspreader event with a bunch of pro-mask vaccine tyrant politicians coming home sick. You see, becoming sick with COVID, it's a sign of a flaw in your moral character unless you have all the doses. So yeah, of course, these people don't want COVID to end. And that's why they're changing the definition of fully vaccinated. It's not 2 doses anymore. It's up to date, which means always more and more. Take a listen.
What we also know from Dr. Tan and every other expert on COVID-19 is that although 2 doses still protects significantly well against severe disease and death, 2 doses are not enough now to protect against infection and transmission. And that is why we are transitioning now to an up-to-date vaccination definition of what it means to be adequately protected against COVID-19. Fully protected with 2 doses doesn't work anymore. Dr. Tam said that last Friday. It's now up-to-date vaccination that needs to be used when you talk about what Canadians should do, what we should expect of Canadians, and what this government should be expected to do.
COVID is the great political escape hatch, isn't it?
That was an excerpt from my daily TV-style show called The Ezra Levant Show. Each weekday, I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview a fascinating guest. I read some fan mail or hate mail, depends on which I like more, and we end with a video of the day. You can get it all at rebelnewsplus.com.